Welcome to the Deep Dive, Hoop City with Paul Sir. I have Ben Golliver with me again today. Ben, it is great to see you once again. We've got a couple of special accomplishments, a couple of special things that took place this past week in the NBA to talk about today.
Sure did. I mean, history, right? With a guy chasing the MVP and then a guy who nobody ever thought would have made history like this in a million years with Bam Adebayo.
Bam who? Yeah, I totally agree with you. And it is so interesting, Ben, to get started to see once again the reach and the legacy of Wilt Chamberlain and all that he did to literally revolutionize the game, galvanize the game, change the game in so many ways. I mean, when you look at old filming of old NBA games, that grainy black and white, and you see that goofy narrow key, what we just can't even imagine today, and guys shooting one-legged set shots and stuff, but how he along with Bill Russell in particular, and a lot of other people that you can refer to. But I think those are when you talk about Mount Rushmore, those are two of the first faces that you would see on the Mount Rushmore. And Wilt, with his absolutely gaudy statistics, has just been such a part of folklore and the created relevance in basketball. But now in 1 week, we're talking about Wilt not once, but twice. So let's start with the accomplishment of Shai Gilgeous-Alexander breaking one of the two records we're going to talk about today that a lot of people thought could never be broken. And that was Wilt scored 20 points per game for 126 consecutive games. I think his record was broken because he was booted out of a game, arguing with the refs. That's what broke his streak. But now Shai Gilgeous-Alexander last night broke the record, got to 127 in a game against the Boston Celtics. What are your thoughts on what Shai accomplished?
Well, first, let me recommend to you, if you haven't seen it, and to all your listeners, Goliath. It's a documentary about Wilt Chamberlain, and it was put out within these last 5 years in conjunction with his family. It's called Goliath because nobody roots for the big guy, right? Everybody's rooting for David. And it talks about what an interesting position he was in as the biggest, best athlete at his time. And the takeaway for me from that movie was he was just 50 years ahead of the rest of the sporting universe. If you look at his love of fashion, the cool cars, of course, the obsession with the statistics, the amount of hatred that he would get, for his accomplishments. They're changing rules to try to limit his effectiveness. And then, of course, just how famous he was and the desire to get to L.A. and to become a star off the court as well, and be in movies and all that kind of stuff. I mean, he was just so much, larger than life and larger than the typical athlete. And he was really into the idea of player empowerment, again, decades before that was a phrase that we even knew what it was. So fascinating movie, and it will help you understand why Wilt Chamberlain still looms over everything in the NBA much better. At least it did for me. Now with Shai, about 10 years ago, maybe 15 years ago now, Kevin Durant was in Oklahoma City trying to chase the same record. He had a whole string of 20-point games too, and he actually didn't get that close. But at the time, his consistency actually had me try to invent some charts and a little statistic just to measure like standard deviation from game to game. How consistent are scores? And at the time, Kevin Durant was like way ahead of everybody, from that standpoint. And we've seen some other guys, James Harden comes to mind during his peak where he was a very consistent scorer. But Shai, I mean, he plays such a herky-jerky game at times, very creative, unpredictable with the ball. But this guy is robotic when it comes to the production. Every single night, you know what to get. And it got to the point where, with Kevin Durant, I was like amazed every time he would hit a new benchmark with those 20-point consecutive games. And with Shai, you're not. You don't. It's just been in the background the whole time because you assume it's going to happen. It would only be news if he didn't score 20 points. And so I think it's a really cool streak for him to have. It really embodies his consistency. I think the leadership component he's brought to Oklahoma City in terms of, hey, you can just count on him. He's going to be there. It also speaks to his health. And this is the kind of streak where you could get ejected, and he's not a hothead, so he's not going to get ejected like Wilt did, but you could also turn an ankle in the first quarter, and then there goes the streak. He's enjoyed very good health. He's taken great care of his body. I think it's an awesome streak, very symbolic of what Oklahoma City is about as well, in terms of just hard hat mentality, bringing it every single day, trying to improve. And I think for all those reasons, it's definitely a moment to salute SGA. And he's had some great moments recently. I'm sure you saw those game winners he hit against Denver in the MVP showdown. It feels like he is now in position to win his second straight MVP award.
He certainly does. And I love the way, first of all, thank you for Goliath. Having the privilege of being of the ilk that I got to watch Wilt play on the one game that was shown on Sunday afternoon on ABC. I got to see so many Wilt Bill Russell matchups. That was usually on Sunday. It was Philadelphia and Boston. And, young kid, you weren't exposed to it that much at that time. So you really didn't have a big frame of reference. I had to scratch and claw to find some grainy black and white broadcast. But what you talk about with Wilt ahead of his time, absolutely. It's like you transplanted somebody from this era back then and, just beamed them back there. It was a Star Trek phenomenon. But I agree with you about all those things that Wilt did, bigger than life, and really changed the culture of basketball that led to Clyde Frazier, that's led to all the flamboyance that has grown out of that. But those were the mustard seeds. What he accomplished at 126 in a row, phenomenal. Now we go to SGA. Robotic. What I love about the term robotic form that you use, Ben, is but it's not robotic and stiff. It's robotic, herky-jerky, creative, off-balance, and so interpretive of what the defense gives him. And I think, and we've touched on this several times, but I would go so far as to say he is now taking the game of basketball. He, like Steph Curry did with shooting, is pulling the game of basketball up to a new plateau of showing what consistency and variety can do to create uncertainty on offense in what has become an awfully predictable style of play that most teams implement. And Shea is changing that. Now, I have some other comments on that, but I'd like to go to you for reflecting on what I just shared.
Yeah, well, I think, it's robotic in the sense that he's like an assembly line where he's just going to pump out the 20 every single night. And whatever defensive scheme you have, whatever personnel you have, if you try to double team him, you single cover him, you let him operate, you don't, he's going to find a way. I mean, he had the quote this week, I have the answers. I just need to know what the questions are, right? And so I will
What a great quote.
Great quote, and very true. He'll find a way to beat you. He just needs to know exactly what he's going up against. I think that speaks to his basketball intelligence as well. I think he's a very smart player. He gets talked about as crafty or grifty and all this kind of stuff. He's just really smart, and he knows how to win the balance battles in terms of getting you, with quick feet, getting you in the air, and then, getting to his spot and doing what he wants to do. Phenomenal player. The other thing that I love about him, and it's another, we're talking about assembly lines, but it's the idea of continual improvement. You hear that in the business world all the time. We just got to get a little bit better. We got to squeeze out a little bit more profit. Shea taught himself how to shoot threes here over these last couple of years, and it is now a major weapon for him in late game situations. I mean, we saw it against Denver, but he's had some other 3-point game winners in the not too distant past. That was not something that he trusted as recently as 2 years ago. It was a question coming into his first MVP season is, could he really develop the off the dribble 3-pointer that made a guy like James Harden so difficult to guard, that made Steph Curry so difficult to guard? For a while, he was kind of limited to that mid-range space. Now that he's been able to, step back, refine that, trust it in the big moments, have the confidence to take it, there really is no option to stop him. And you're just kind of hoping. The only team I've seen him even give him trouble this year has been San Antonio, and that's because they've got the alien on the back line. But other than that, nobody even really gives him that much trouble.
He really manipulates his defender masterfully, and his stat lines are they're incredible when you read them consistently because of his efficiency. Like last night, he was 14 for 18 with 35 points against Denver, along with that great game winner. I forget what his point total was, but he had 15 assists and no turnovers. Like those are ridiculous numbers. Like that's outrageously good. I'd like to reflect a little bit about what you said, though, which I think the most critical point for young players to understand. And because when you see a player like Shea, he goes home when the season's over, goes back to his hometown in Ontario, goes into his old high school gym, as I understand it, with his buddies, and he works on his game in quiet, nobody around. So he really turns his summer into his assembly line, to use your robotics, on how he's going to get better and what he's going to get better at. And that's what certainly AAU coaches don't do in most situations. But it's what you do, how you do it when nobody's looking, that makes you good. And it's doing a lot more of everything, again, and how you're doing it, that makes you great. But to see him continually get better and better and better, and more subtle and nuanced, develop that 3-point step back, it's all due to his hard work. And you hear that, everybody says that in a very trite manner, but hard work, there's no replacement. There's no technology, there's no machine, there's no magic drill. There's only hard, purposeful, focused work with defined outcomes, and he does it better than anybody.
And he's working smart too, right? It's not just the idea of I have to wake up at 4 a.m. to tell everybody I'm waking up at 4 a.m. or I'm staying in the gym for 12 hours. It's the idea of, hey, what did I struggle with in the playoffs? How did the very best defenses try to guard me? Do I need to, get my left hand dribble a little bit better so I can handle pressure from certain spots? Do I need to understand, hey, if there's a double coming, where's my release valve? And so you work on things like that. Do you make sure that you have the off the dribble 3-pointer going left and going right, depending on how they might guard you at the top of the key pick and roll? Like, to me, he's really isolated. Hey, this might be not even a weakness. This might just be not quite where I want it to be. And then he's just going to go attack it and make that part of his game better. And I do think that there's a lot of players, you see the summer clips come out of the work that they're doing. And, it's a lot of jab step or one-on-one moves. And, maybe they're going to do that stuff in NBA games. Maybe they're not. When Shea does stuff in the games, you could tell he's been in that gym that you're talking about, working on it for hours and hours and hours. And that's why he's so good and so comfortable doing it in high pressure situations.
If I could have, back in the late 70s, I think it was at White Sox Park, what started the demise of disco is some radio station in Chicago had people bring disco records and had a bonfire down on the field. If I could have a bonfire, I would take all of the cones that AAU coaches use, all the cones and tennis balls that they incorporate in their drills, and have a huge bonfire, because it's such crap to me. I'm speaking just really bluntly. Yeah. You don't need, that's just YouTube, Instagram crap. That doesn't make you a better player. What Shea does makes you a better player. Doing it purposefully, outcome, systematically, identifying. That's how you become a better player. And it's practice time. I recall back to Dirk Nowitzki's great era, and they had him out on the court with a German coach in a plaid shirt, coaching him out there, looking like he's doing ballet lessons. Well, Dirk won an NBA championship against LeBron James and Dwayne Wade. I mean, this is no joke. This is like, we keep having these examples. Michael Jordan, Bird, Magic, Steph Curry, the hours and hours when nobody's looking. That's what we have to listen to. And that's the greatness of Gilgeous-Alexander. And like I said, I think he's just pulling everybody up into that realization of what you are capable of doing, the versatility a player can have in his game.
No question. And, that work might not make for good content. It might be boring to watch what Shea does during the summer, because it might be repetitive for hours on end. And if you're the trainer, maybe you're not getting as many YouTube clicks as you want. Maybe you do want to bring out the gimmicks so you can, go viral and get a little bit of attention. But I think it's a great lesson. great content doesn't mean great basketball, and vice versa. Great basketball is not always great content, but Shea is just an awesome example of player development. And when we're in this tanking era, everybody just wants to talk about tanking, tanking, tanking. If you actually look at the teams that are winning the championships, it's not necessarily that they're doing it with tons and tons of top picks. They're doing it with the players who were the most committed to their games, who developed the most after they got drafted, and who were within cultures that really helped them develop. You look at the Boston Celtics, they developed Jaylen Brown and Jason Tatum so much while they were there. Nikola Jokic was drafted a Taco Bell commercial. He completely changed his body, right? Shea was a lower lottery pick who got traded after his rookie season. All of these guys have become much, much better players while they're in the NBA compared to where they were when they were drafted. And so to me, every organization that's just dead set on tanking, you got to worry about culture first, and you got to worry about player development. Those are the two things that are actually winning basketball games. And you might get a talent at 11 who winds up being the MVP. You might get somebody at 1 who winds up out of the league in 5 years, right? So, that's why it really is about that dedication that you're talking about.
Well, it really is. I have a real quick story. My high school coach, he left the school that he coached me at in Iowa, went to a small school in Wisconsin, and coached the rest of his career there. He's a great coach and one of my dearest friends. He went to a coaching clinic once, and Dick Bennett was there. Dick Bennett he took the under-talented Wisconsin Badgers to the Final Four. I think it was 2000. He went to it, and Dick came out, and he apparently said something to the effect of, I have 14 principles of defense. After an hour and a half, he was on number 2. Daryl said it was paint drying. But it's the attention to detail.
Yeah.
Rick Majerus, the great coach from Utah, same thing, attention to detail. You'll not waking up in the morning, throwing your hoodie on, and doing the Rocky thing, getting there and going through the stuff, the music playing in the background. It's hard work. It's repetitive. It's purposeful. And there isn't a lot of glory in it. So kids, enjoy your AAU weekends, but then we'll go home and we'll watch Shea play because he's really a great player.
Yeah.
Great accomplishment there. Broke Wilt's 126 game consecutive 20-point game record. Then we had another one, and I'm talking to Ben Golliver. Ben's written for Sports Illustrated, Washington Post, been one of the great NBA sports writers forever. You can read his work right now on Substack, and it's fantastic. But Ben, the controversy around an 83-point game by a guy named Bam Adebayo. Now, if you started at the beginning of the year and you said somebody's going to score 83 this year, and you listed your top 100 possibilities, would Bam been in your top 100?
Well, you could ask me that question at halftime of that game when he already had 40-something points, and I wouldn't have believed it. I mean, he's not known as a scorer. He's an all-defensive type guy, 3-time All-Star.
Yes.
Very talented player, 2-time gold medalist with USA Basketball. I covered both of those runs, but he was kind of a bit player even for those teams. And this was just the night where everything aligned for him. He's playing against a Wizards team that's kind of, they're tanking, they're bad, and they were undermanned from an injury perspective. And he just went to work early, got off to a really strong start, more than 30 points in the first quarter. And I think the controversy, from the game was just the idea that rather than calling off the dogs, which is what a lot of coaches do when the game's a blowout, Eric Spoelstra and the Heat just decided we're going to go all out for this thing. And, we're not going to do the normal sportsmanship stuff of, pulling our starters when we're up by 25 points in the fourth quarter. They're actually going to go the other way and try to extend the game as much as possible, intentionally fouling, trying to get the ball back, force feeding the ball to Bam. Of course, in some cases, they were intentionally missing free throws just to try to get the offensive rebound so he could have another scoring opportunity. It got really crazy towards the end of that game. And it should be pointed out, Bam already had basically 70 points before it really turned into a farce. So, he had a great game no matter what anyone would say. I think my problem with the whole deal was, Spoelstra is someone who has really preached the virtues of Heat culture, the idea that they want to be the most professional team in the NBA. They want to be in the best shape. It's a very holier than thou high horse attitude. And I'll be honest, I bought into it. I mean, he's made 6 finals. He's taken some teams that probably didn't deserve to be in the finals, got them to the finals. He happens to be from Portland, Oregon, my neck of the woods. He's a local legend there, the golden child of Oregonian basketball. And so he's somebody who I've always had a ton of respect for. And I wanted him to be the USA basketball head coach since, 15 years ago. And I was just really surprised that he was willing to, in my view, humiliate the opponents. The idea of we're going to run up the score, we're going to stat chase, we're not going to do the kind of the quote unquote things the right way, as, maybe a coach like Steve Kerr did with Steph Curry back in the day, where, they allowed some record chases to go because they were winning by so many points, just blowing teams off the court. And so I felt like by the end of it, because of all the craziness in the last couple of minutes, it sort of cheapened the accomplishment. And I know there was a lot of backlash, from players and coaches within the league. And of course, a lot of support for Bam and the Heat as well. I mean, it was a divided thing. It wasn't everybody was angry about it. But I came down on the side of like, hey, this wasn't quite the way to do it. And I think had they wanted to chase the record, it would have been better to do it organically, rather than doing all the foul nonsense. Let Bam take every shot if you insist, and let's see if he could do it. And he was so tired by the end of it, he could barely even get the 3-pointers to the rim, So I don't think he would have gotten 83 without the hijinks. And so for me, I'm always going to remember the 83 for the hijinks, also for his accomplishment, but also because of what they did to get there.
I jokingly mentioned to you the other day the Bam Sham, and Bam. I came up with Bam the Sham, but in this isn't counterpoints, but this is an alternative perspective that as I've thought about it, and I had a recent experience that is somewhat linked to this. I was on a panel. The Alberta Basketball Association celebrated its 50th anniversary. And they had a panel of myself and 3 other Edmonton local basketball people, coaches, players, etc. So we had this exact conversation that night because a good friend of mine who was a coach, I'll keep the names out of it. We were asked by the moderator, what was your most exciting moment in your coaching career? And this guy said, was the night one of my players scored 79 points and set the league scoring record. And, he was hitting everything, and I just left him in the game, and he went off, and it was just wonderful. The kid was so excited, and this friend of mine is a very excitable, emotional guy. So he's all animated up there. And it was like somebody brought a full bucket of water and threw it on him, because then this coach, who's a prominent Canadian Hall of Fame coach, won national championships, said, I am just appalled and aghast that you would do that. I would never have done that in a million.
Sounds like me, huh? I'm throwing the cold water.
Oh, he did the Gatorade thing. You threw a glass of water in the kid's face. This guy threw the Gatorade thing on the guy's head. But anyway, so he's talking about this, very pontificating, blah, blah, blah. And I said, well, Coach, with all due respect, I've seen you leave players in the game when you're blowing people out and they scored a lot of points. Why is that different than this? Oh, yeah, but we were competing. I said, no, you were way ahead. Now, the other fellow, he happens to hold a record for the most points ever scored at a particular university. And he said, oh, this is just terrible. Game I scored all these points, I took myself out of the game. I just, we were, blah, blah, blah. Well, I looked up his score sheet, and that's BS. He's playing like 38 minutes to drop the amount of points he scored. Where I'm coming from on this, and I'll tell one real quick personal anecdote. I coached all 4 of my sons. Growing up in what we call community league up here. And one year, there's a rule in community league. There's supposed to be kids from your community, but you can have 2 imports. So we sound like the NBA. These are 6th graders, and so 2 kids who were both good wanted to play for me in 6th grade. So I knew their moms, and they came over and played. Well, we rolled everybody, and these kids were good. They were very advanced. And all of our kids, not all of our kids, but our top 5 for that level were really advanced. So they're writing letters to the community league organization. They're having a meeting. They have this big meeting. and they're complaining about this and all the blowouts. And I said, okay, all I ask is show me the rule book where I'm breaking the rule. Well, you're not breaking the rule, but you're breaking the spirit of the rule. I said, why are you saying that? We don't press. We don't, the kids are just better. They're just a real good team this year. My point being this, they didn't break any rules, but Spoelstra for one night became a different person.
Yeah, he did.
And that's part of what I love about it is he said, oh, what the hell? I'm going to do this tonight. I've never done this before. I'll probably never do it again. But tonight, Bam's got a chance to do something. So let's break all the rules. It's like you went out for your last night in college and got really drunk.
It's a bachelor party. It's his bachelor party,
Yeah, the bachelor party, streak through the girls' dorm. You did something that you just never should do. But, and like you said, what's cool about it is, man, does it have us all talking?
Well, I understand the perspective too, and the temptation is always going to be there. I mean, he got 70 points, like kind of, early in the fourth quarter. How many chances are you going to get? And so that, keeps guys egging on. When I look at it though, especially because it's the Heat, and they've told us how professional they are. My concern is sort of from the sportsmanship standpoint. Now, your team might have just been better than the opponents, and you're winning these games organically, and you're not trying to rub it in people's faces. That is not always the case, though. And I think that what I like the idea of sportsmanship, to be a real goal at all levels, from the NBA all the way on down. Because the idea is that, you're not always going to win every game in life. Sometimes you're going to be on the losing side. And I was always taught win with class, lose with dignity, right? And so if you happen to be on a team where the coach isn't nice like you, and they know they have the better team, and they press, and guess what? They're starting to get some local attention. Maybe they're getting in the national rankings for USA Today, so they press some more, and then they start humiliating you, and you lose a game 107-2. The kids who are on that losing side, they're not going to want to play basketball anymore. That's not fun. They don't want to be a part of this entire endeavor. And so they're going to grow up. They're not going to be basketball fans. They're not going to watch basketball. They're not going to stay connected to the sport. And so when you have very high profile games like this, where a lot of people are watching and a lot of impressionable kids are watching, my concern, and Spoelstra, look, he doubled down. I mean, he gave a classic press conference where he's like, I'm not going to apologize to anybody. He basically just flipped the middle finger at me, metaphorically. And, I appreciate, philosophically, I just look at it differently than he does. And I respect his opinion. But there's a lot of people out there now who are going to say, well, the Miami Heat did it. Eric Spoelstra, the head of USA Basketball, he did it. So now we can do it. I'm the coach's, coach's kid, and now I get to have 45 shots in an AAU game. Well, who cares? I mean, it doesn't matter if I'm hurting anybody's feelings because Eric Spoelstra did it. So that's my concern, just kind of big picture, and why I think the guardrails of sportsmanship are so important. And it's actually a game like that is the best moment to restrain yourself, just like Steve Kerr did. I really gained a lot of respect for how Steve Kerr handled this stuff when he was doing it at the time, because everybody loves Steph. I mean, people are kind of indifferent about Bam, but the idea that Steph could maybe score 80 if Steve Kerr let him go, and he never did, I appreciate that restraint, and I think it's kind of a lost art. And my other concern, specifically for the NBA, is all these guys are just copycats. And the last time we started having like one guy scored 70, 4 guys scored 70 in like a year span, right? And so now Bam has 83. Well, there's going to be other guys in the NBA who say, if Bam could do it, I could do it. And then if Spoelstra has now said, well, you could do whatever tactics you want, it no longer matters, all bets are off, we're just going to go for it. I worry that we're going to get more and more of these goofy games, and we're going to look around and the record book is going to have all these numbers in it that it didn't have previously. And then we're going to have to sit here and say, hey, is this actually the league that we wanted? Or is this some sort of a perverted version of basketball that, it wasn't the end goal? Look, I know I'm sounding holier than thou. I'm sounding like I'm taking this stuff too seriously. But I just don't know if this approach is good for the game. And I do think in general, I'm with the people who say, hey, try to respect the game at every turn, even in the big moments, and try to respect your opponent as well. You should be able to shake hands when you walk off that court. And if I was the Wizards, I would have had a really hard time shaking hands with the Heat based on how they handle themselves.
What you've just, I think, explained so wonderfully is everything that could be the outcome of this, and particularly in the descriptor of the NBA being copycats. Ben. I couldn't agree with you more. Like, I'm of two minds on this. Like, I express the one side of my perspective on it through personal experience, but also through, like, you can make a case for this and say, oh, what the heck? Nobody was hurt. But I agree with you. The copycat idea, particularly on the trickle down effect on coaches, on it's the AAU, the junior high. Now, the good thing about this, though, is this was Bam Adebayo. And I guarantee you 3 days from now, in my mind, people won't go, what was that guy's name again? That just scored 83. But it does crack the door open. And there could be other, the great word is shenanigans. There could be other shenanigans that come out of that when people, and particularly in this hot take era, when people are looking for ways to get attention. I can see high school teams have this happen. Now, quick trivia.
Well, let me ask you this real quick. So when your team was smoking all those other teams, what is the messaging in game or maybe at practice or after the game in terms of conduct? Because I imagine you're not letting them dance all over the court. You're not letting them taunt in the opposing players' faces. You're making sure that they high five after the game. You're letting them know you're going to see this team again, right? I mean, imagine you're doing a lot of coaching because, I mean, you have to do coaching when your team loses by 20 every night, but you also have to do a lot of coaching if your team wins by 20 every single night, right?
And I always have been a believer that you oftentimes learn more by losing than winning, as long as it's not systemic. But the key for me for coaching was what I strived for was that the kids played at the highest level that they were capable of playing at, regardless of their opponent. But then there became that point in the second half, if we were ahead, we did the 5 pass, like a lot of coaches do, 5 passes before you shoot.
Slow it
fast
down.
breaking, slow it down. Like, we don't want to humiliate these kids like that. No taunting, no trash talking. None of that was allowed. If it happened, they were sitting down.
Oh, you pulled them. You just benched them.
Oh, yeah. There was none of that. And so I just wanted them to compete. I didn't want to penalize them because they were better, but I didn't want to humiliate the kids through our actions. It was just more through our play. I wanted teams afterwards to say, man, we got beat really, but you guys are really good.
Yeah.
And then our guys to be respectful to them and encouraging to them. So I think for the most part, we accomplished that. But that was 30 years ago. And then we didn't have Instagram and all this. Yeah. And so I think now we're at such a different era of what people do to gain attention for themselves, that It's just the theater of the absurd almost every day. So,
well, that's one of the messages I'm trying to get out is people like to associate the old school sportsmanship as being like antiquated or it's from 30 years ago. And the way I'm trying to spin it in every interview I do or everything that I write, the idea that sportsmanship is timeless. Sportsmanship was around way before basketball was around. There's been competition of every kind going back thousands and thousands of years, right? Rules of engagement, right? I mean, we have all these guardrails built into society to kind of, direct conduct so that everybody comes out of it with a positive experience, right? Or as positive and fair of an experience as possible. And just because a lot has changed in the sporting world in the last 10 or 15 years, and we've got television, Instagram, and all that kind of stuff, it doesn't mean sportsmanship is out of style.
Never goes out of style, and never should be. Bad sportsmanship shouldn't be tolerated. It's one of the things I hate about the NFL is the ludicrous, obnoxious, childish celebration after you make a tackle.
Yeah.
You made a tackle. Like, who cares? And they're throwing their arms up in the air, screaming. I mean, it's so out of control. And again, such bad form for kids to see that that's what they associate with success. So I'm with you. Sportsmanship. Now, and for the most part, I see in the NBA even, there's a fraternal sort of attitude mostly between players. And I think overall it's not horrible at all, but that's not necessarily what kids pick up on,
Well,
and that's what they see.
I think that's one interesting part about the BAM thing is that usually when a record gets broken of this magnitude, The fraternal part is what carries the day. Everyone gets excited, and it's nothing but positive responses and congratulations and celebrations. And instead, what you heard from this was some people pushing back, saying, hey, wait a minute, that didn't really feel like basketball at the end of the game. Hey, wait a minute, Wemby's shrugging it off. JJ Redick and Ime Udoka are kind of taking subtle digs at how the end of the game went. I think that there was people within that fraternity who looked at the Heat and they said, hey, you guys kind of stepped out of line here. This wasn't really the right way to do it. And
I'm glad they're
people stood up for him too. Yeah.
I'm glad they're speaking up, because that's exactly what should come out of this, is both sides of the debate. Yeah, you can look at it and say, you can make cases for this. They did what they did. It's within the rules. They just bent the intent of the sportsmanship and broke the code is basically what they did. Now, JJ Redick, I'm curious. He used the firemen and plumbers metaphor, which took my notion of him down a whole bunch. What did he use for this? I want to hear what JJ had to say about this.
No, he just said he watched the last couple of minutes and he didn't think it seemed like real basketball. It was a different kind of basketball was sort of what he said. Now, of course, as the head coach of the Lakers, he's feeling a lot of pressure from Lakers Nation to stand up for Kobe's honor, because Kobe had 81. So maybe he's not the most unbiased observer here. So not to argue with myself, but I actually think the strongest argument in favor of what Coach Spoelstra did and what Bam Adebayo did in terms of chasing this record is the idea that Washington broke the code first by being a tanking team that actually doesn't care about winning basketball. And if they're not going to, this is not the scenario where your team in Canada is just better than the neighbor county's team. And so, you got to be nice to them. It's as if the neighbors county team was pulling in the plumbers, so to speak. And they're just saying, hey, we don't even care. We're not trying to win. We have some weird incentive to not participate. And I think Spoelstra defended it with this idea that, hey, this is Darwinism. Essentially, this is evolution, kill or be killed. And he's saying, look, if you're going to do things like Washington, there's going to be results, to that. It's a compelling argument because there's no defending how Washington approached this game. I mean, even their starting center, Alex Sarr, very good defensive player. He was on a 20 minute limit. For what? Nobody really knows why. Right. He could have gone back into the game and probably helped them try to slow down Bam Adebayo. It didn't feel like their coaching staff was well prepared for this moment in terms of countering all the tactics Miami was doing. It just felt like and then there was no fights, there was no shoving matches. They just rolled over, right? Yeah. They allowed this thing to happen. And so if that's the case, to a certain degree, it's like, is this a team that deserves to be shamed or humiliated based on how that they're operating? You can make that argument. I would still try to take the high road. I would still say, hey, look, beat them by 30 and then call off the dogs. And, you've proven your point. But, there's no victims here. Washington, they can't look around and say, they can't cry foul about what happened on the court, because their entire existence this season has been anti-competitive.
Well, and I think, and talking about the code, I think of, what is that, Jack Nicholson, A Few Good Men. I think, the code, Kiefer Sutherland, we have code, we have honor. But, I think, that was Nicholson. But I think it shines a spotlight on the absurdity, excuse me, the absurdity in the NBA this year with the focus on tanking because of this great draft class coming up. And with Adam Silver trying to come up with ways to counter it, it's really hard. But to me, I keep using mustard seed, that metaphor, but to me, the mustard seed of all of that came with load management. Is when that became a thing, that became real. We're going to rest players. People, yeah, you're paying several $100 to bring a couple of kids to the game, but I'm going to sit my guy out tonight, even though he's healthy, because he might be a little tired. And we got to keep him ready for the playoffs. That, to me, was the starting point of this. Well, we can bend the rules to suit us. We can change things around to suit us and to make it more of a public institutionalized approach to the game. And that has kind of, again, spread out into all of these other facets.
Well, and this goes back to sort of, a wider NBA commentary. an 83-point game should be the greatest moment in 5 years of NBA, right? I mean, actually, Shea's record's actually pretty incredible too. So I was glad that we started with that one. But the idea that someone scores 83 points, I mean, we've been sitting around 20 years waiting for something like this to happen, right? And the fact that it sort of highlights a lot of the things that people don't like about the NBA, which is the lack of defense, the tanking, the load management of injured players. Anthony Davis isn't playing. Trae Young's not playing. The idea of just the mixed incentives. Well, does Washington even care if they give up 83 points because they're trying to lose the basketball game, right? The fact that that becomes a part of this conversation too here, it's sort of like the NBA made its bed and now it's sleeping in it, right? Because you can't even have this phenomenal moment of history fully celebrated because it represents a lot of what people don't like about it. And the other thing I saw going around was people saying, imagine if you would bet on Bam Adebayo to score 83 points, how much money you would make. That's the last thing I want anybody to be thinking about is the gambling implications of a historical moment. But of course, that's now a huge part of the fabric of the league too. So it's a strange time for the NBA,
Well, it's a strange time for pro basketball. We won't delve into the WNBA right now, but the rumors and rumblings of the behind-the-scenes conversations that Caitlin Clark's people are having with the league about what her demands are in terms of the expectations on the enforcement of rules in the league. Again, not only are they not getting the deal done, they're flirting with killing the goose that has laid the golden egg, which has made them relevant, that if she goes away, they evaporate. They start the evaporation process. Certainly they build a stronger platform. I don't want to overstate it, but it's a strange time for basketball. NIL, free movement of players. JUCO doesn't count as eligibility anymore. It's like you went away in a time capsule. You went away in a spaceship, went up to the moon, came back, and somebody said, this is what basketball looks like now? You go, what? When did this happen?
Well, G Leaguers playing in college with eligibility? I mean,
it's a crazy time.
That's the part that really doesn't make sense to me. I don't know. I've had it explained to me, but it doesn't sit right.
Well, I really get the feeling now that the cats have been let out of the corral, they're running everywhere. Well, we can do this now. Let's try this. It's a slippery slope, and but it's made for a great conversation today, Ben. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Always great to discuss the latest happenings. And boy, we had a lot happen this week, didn't we?
We sure did. Ben, tell everybody how they can follow you on Substack, on Twitter, and on your podcast.
Oh, yeah. BenGolliver.substack.com, at Ben Golliver on Twitter. And the show is called Greatest of All Talk. So you can just Google that. You'll find it.
And you know what? It is the greatest of all talk. I encourage everybody to listen. Ben Golliver, thank you for joining me today here on the Deep Dive on Hoop City with Paul Sir.
My pleasure. I loved hearing about your youth teams running up the score on people and trying to do it the right way.